Good morning, friends. How are you today? That's good. Sounds convincing. Right. So the Italian-looking gentleman that you see above my head is the poet Dante, who in the 14th century wrote a very influential poem called The Divine Comedy. Wasn't all that funny, to be honest. This was a book in which he took his readers on an allegorical journey through hell, then purgatory, then heaven. The most interesting part of his poem is called the Inferno. That's the bit about hell. And according to Dante, there are 9 circles or 9 levels of hell, each of which are progressively more torturous and less pleasant than the next. So, for example, the first circle of hell is reserved for people who do pretty bad things. So, you're like you're a professional hockey player, but you can't score against a Zamboni driver, for example. You're definitely going there. And then the second circle of hell, a little bit worse, that's for people who do naughty sexual stuff, according to Dante. And then a little bit further down in the third circle of hell, there's people who are greedy and too obsessed with money, according to Dante. Then fast forward all the way to the 9th and lowest and worst circle of hell. That, according to Dante, was reserved for people who during their lives committed acts of treachery and betrayal. Here's what Dante said. He said, here, in the 9th circle, is the agony of fraudulent acts between individuals who have shared special bonds of love and trust. Now, you're probably not into 14th century religious poetry, and I can't blame you. But you get this, right? Some of the worst feelings you've had in your life arose out of things people did to you. And those people weren't strangers, they weren't enemies, they weren't nasties, they were your friends. They were your family. They were people you loved. And you rightly thought that they loved you back. And when they said what they said and did what they did and treated you the way that they treated you, it stabbed you right in the heart. So you get what Dante is driving at here. The worst things that people do are betray those with whom they have bonds of love, family, friendship, and affection. This morning I want to have a wee look at an episode that comes from the very end of Jesus' life. The writer tells us that the chief priests and the teachers of the law, so Bible teachers, were looking for some way to arrest Jesus and kill him. Let me just shorten that sentence. Bible teachers were looking for a way to kill Jesus. And this particular verse oozes with nastiness. The way this sentence is actually written in 1st century Greek says that the teachers of the Bible were looking for, and here's the key word, a cunning way to arrest Jesus and to kill him. Why cunning? Because they're Bible teachers. And Bible teachers aren't supposed to be looking for ways to ruin other people's lives. Bible teachers aren't supposed to have murder in their motivation. They're supposed to be nice, they're supposed to be kind, they're supposed to be friendly, they're supposed to, at a bare minimum, teach people the Bible. And yet these dudes are looking for a cunning way to spoil Jesus' life. I think they're the worst kind of people, by the way. People who want to hurt you without looking like they want to hurt you. People who want to stab you in the back without it looking like they want to stab you in the back. Do you know what I mean? You know people like this. They appear friendly, but they're anything but. Furthermore, in 6 AD, Judea became a Roman province. And one of the consequences of this is that it means that the Roman state are no longer allowed to execute anyone. That right is reserved solely for the Romans. So when this verse says that they're looking for a way to arrest Jesus and kill him, it means that they have to go about this in an underhanded way so that no one notices their true motive. Sneaky, sneaky people. And I know for you, that was the worst thing about being betrayed the way that you were betrayed. That's why it felt so bad. It wasn't just that they did what they did, it was that they planned to do what they did. They thought about it in advance, and you had no clue what they were thinking about. And they waited for the perfect time. And what hurt you the most wasn't just that they did it, it was the way that they did it. And the fact that they planned it while you thought they were your friend. And the issue that particularly concerns these men in their sneakiness is that Jerusalem, notice the text, is about to celebrate the Feast of Unleavened Bread and the Passover. And the reason that this is of concern to them is that the population of Jerusalem in the first century ordinarily ran at about 50,000 people. However, during major religious festivals, pilgrims from all over Israel and all over the world actually came to the city to celebrate. And during those big festivals, and Passover was the biggest, the population swelled to about 250,000 people. And the majority of those 250,000 pilgrims who are in Jerusalem celebrating Passover, this is the act in which they remembered deliverance from Egypt, they find it incongruous to be celebrating Passover under the watchful eye of a Roman garrison. The popular thinking went something like this. Here we are in the holy city, celebrating Passover. Let's think about the thing we're celebrating. We're celebrating that event in our history when God sent a deliverer to rescue us from our oppressor. That's what this whole festival's about. God sending a deliverer to rescue us from an oppressor. And yet here we are, celebrating this very thing under the watchful gaze of another oppressor, the Romans. And so for that reason, every year since 6 AD, when Judea became a Roman province, the people who went to Jerusalem to celebrate Passover were kind of hot-headed and kind of quick-tempered. And so every year there was disturbances, every year there was arrests, and it was kind of tense. You know, it was like a, it was like a train track outside Belleville. It was that kind of vibe. And the sneaky teachers of the law know this. They know that Jesus is popular. And they know that many among the 250,000 people who've come to Jerusalem to celebrate Passover, they think things about Jesus. And one of the things they think is that he is the deliverer. That somehow Jesus is going to be the one who God will use to get rid of the Romans. That's the kind of popular feeling about Jesus. And so the sneaky teachers of the Bible correctly understand that if they lay a hand on Jesus, if their true motivation becomes public, and everyone knows they're trying to kill him, there's going to be a riot. And if there's a riot, the Romans will crack down. And if the Romans crack down, it's bad for business, it's bad for the religious festival. And these people who make money out of the festival will lose money. And no one likes to lose money. Hence the need for sneakiness. Let me jump to verse 10. So you get these Bible teachers. You're trying to kill someone. Then we're told that Judas Iscariot, one of the 12, went to the chief priests to betray Jesus to them. They were delighted. They were delighted to hear this, and they promised to give him money. Don't look at me, look at the sentence. The emotion, the driving emotion in that sentence is joy, delight. They have found a way to ruin a man's life. And their predominant emotion is joy and happiness. There's something, that's dark. But it's a darkness that you may well be familiar with. That thing in us that takes pleasure in someone else's misfortune. That actually feels good when someone else feels bad. This is horrible. And for me, this is one of the coldest sentences in the gospel. Take Judas. Judas, as you know, was one of Jesus' good friends. He'd lived with Jesus, travelled with Jesus, worked closely with Jesus 7 days a week for the past 3 years. And this is an obvious thing to say, but it needs saying. You don't get hurt by your enemies. Not typically. When you go to work tomorrow morning, and there's that person in your office who's an idiot. And the reason they're an idiot is because they were born an idiot. They've always lived like an idiot. And every day you've ever known them, they've been an idiot. And when tomorrow morning they do something idiotic, you won't be surprised or upset by their idiocy. Because you kind of expect it. Sure, strangers can hurt you, I get that. Sure, enemies can hurt you, I get that. But it's your friends, your family, the people you trusted, the people you thought you were closest to. They're the ones who can hurt you the most, because you just don't see it coming. To an outsider looking in, the relationship between Jesus and Judas was close. Now, 2,000 years of negative Christian spin have quite rightly left us with a negative view of Judas. But to grasp the irony of this story, we have to understand that Jesus and Judas were friends. In the words of Dante, they shared a bond of love and trust. And so it is, I think, with a remarkable economy of words that the Bible writer tells us here that Jesus' friend, one of his closest friends, one of his inner circle, one of the people he shared his deepest thoughts to, went to his enemies to betray him. And the emotion in that act of betrayal was happiness, delight, and joy. There was laughing involved. We're not told the reason for Judas's actions here, but I'm pretty sure I know. Judas, this is a guess, but almost certainly accurate. I think that Judas has become increasingly disillusioned with Jesus lately. According to ancient Christian tradition, Judas belonged to a rather hardcore movement in first century Jewish society called the Zealots. And the Zealots were deeply anti-Roman. They were, so from the year 6 AD onwards, they objected to everything Roman, and they were all about violence, they were all about blowing stuff up, they were all about stabbing Roman soldiers, doing everything they could to remove Romans from Israel. And Judas was part of this. So if Judas, for example, was involved in Canadian politics today, he'd be one of the guys saying, send in the army, tear down the blockades, don't mess about, let's just get it done. This was Judas's worldview. No nonsense, no messing about, let's get rid of the Romans. And it's a fair assumption that when Judas first heard Jesus speaking 3 years earlier, he thought Jesus was the guy. Jesus, after all, spoke about the kingdom of God. He spoke about a new beginning, about a new society. And I think Judas assumed, like many others, that when Jesus spoke about these things, what Jesus was speaking about was an armed rebellion against Rome. Was a journey towards Jerusalem, at the end of which meant the Romans would be gone and everyone in Israel would be happy and free and prosperous and healthy, and life would be good. And in the early days of Jesus' career, as he gathers these larger and larger and larger crowds around him, and as the story works from Galilee down towards Jerusalem, all the time Judas is thinking, this is the guy, this is what I've always looked for, someone who will lead us to freedom and happiness and a better life with no Romans in it. And bearing that in mind, the recent weeks of Jesus' ministry must have been very hard for Judas to hear, because instead of speaking about an armed rebellion against Rome, Jesus has been speaking about something different. He's been talking about giving up his life. Instead of mapping out a road to happiness and freedom, he's been talking about serving and suffering and dying. Instead of speaking about the restoration of the Jewish state, he's been talking about its destruction. Just a day earlier, in fact, Jesus, when he went into Jerusalem, looked at the temple and said, this temple is going to get torn down. This temple is going to be destroyed. And for a man like Judas, who was so pro-Jewish, to hear his hero say that would have been just too much. This wasn't what he signed up for. And I was thinking a bit this week anyway about Judas, which isn't something I often do. Or when I do think about Judas, I think about myself as a victim, and so do you, right? I bet if I use the word Judas, you immediately think of the Judases you know, right? The people who betrayed you and let you down and all that. But it seems to me that as far as the gospel is concerned, there's a little bit of Judas in each of us. And to a lesser degree, we replicate the thought process of Judas almost every day of our Christian lives. Judas's betrayal was precipitated by an unwillingness to accept that Jesus' version of the kingdom of God was right. The kingdom of God, according to Jesus, wasn't pretty. The kingdom of God, according to Jesus, was like what? A small mustard seed that enters a person's life and then grows like a weed until it dominates a person's thoughts, a person's ambitions, a person's social life, a person's attitude to pleasure, a person's ambitions, emotions, everything. And of course, the uncomfortable thing about that domination is that it is tantamount to a surrender of ourselves. Here's the kingdom of God according to Jesus. You've got to take up your cross and follow me. Here's the kingdom of God according to Jesus. You've got to put yourself last and others first. Here's the kingdom of God according to Jesus. You've got to lose yourself. Here's the kingdom of God according to Jesus. You've got to abandon the values and aspirations and assumptions of this culture. You have to put God before money. You have to see your role in this life as being one of a slave, one of a servant. That's the sort of thing that Jesus has been saying for the past few weeks. And insofar as we reject that teaching and replace it with a spiritualized version of our own cultural values, we do the Judas thing. Not by our words, not by our actions, of course, but we say that Jesus is wrong. That we will not submit to his agenda for our lives. We say that Jesus' agenda for our lives has to go, and it has to be replaced with a Jesus that better fits the self-absorbed reality of who we are and how we live. Because following a Jesus who calls us to abandon ourselves in favour of him and others just doesn't work for us. And so just as Judas wanted a Jesus who would fit into his nationalistic agenda, so too we want a Jesus who will fit into our narcissistic agenda. We're all about us. And we want Jesus to be all about us as well, and to validate our selfishness. And that's the sort of thing that's going through Judas's mind as he does what he does. So that's all dark. It's horrible. And then into that dark, dark story, a story about otherwise good people rejoicing in the murder of another man, Mark inserts a completely unrelated story about a sketchy woman. And everyone loves stories about sketchy women. Verse 3. While he was in Bethany, reclining at the table in the home of a man known as Simon the leper. The Bible doesn't tell us much about Simon the leper, but he was a bit of a flaky character, apparently. Oh, come on, that was good. Right. Anyway, so picture the scene. Jesus is having a meal, and as is the custom in the ancient Near East, he's reclining on cushions. He's, Simon is there. The rest of, there's probably about 15, 20, maybe 30 people, around this seated cushion meal. It's a good time. And as is the culture in the ancient Near East, there are no women in the room. So here's the culture. There's a room for men, and there's a room for women. And the only time when women leave the women's room and come into the man's room is when they're bringing food, bringing drinks, or cleaning tables. Now, that sounds totally misogynistic, but that was the culture. Don't blame me. Right? So, try and picture the scene. You're a guy, and you're in a room of guys, and you're talking guy stuff, you're drinking guy stuff, you're making guy stuff noises out your back end. It's a guy stuff event. And then Mark tells us that a woman, a solitary woman, enters the room. And she brings with her an alabaster jar of expensive perfume made of nard. And we're later told that this was worth a year's wages. She's carrying a year's wages in her hand. Think about that. A Rolex watch isn't a year's wages. A bottle of Chateau Latour isn't a year's wages. This is a lot. And alabaster is fragile. Now, what this woman is carrying is called perfume, but it's not perfume. It's not perfume in the sense that it's the thing you dab on your neck before you go on a date to make yourself smell nice. This is more than that. This is an investment. This is a nest egg. In the ancient world, women tended not to have private incomes. So there were no RSPs or anything in the ancient world. So people tended to invest in commodities. And the most typical commodity investments were gold coins, if you could get them, purple cloth, if you could get it, and more typically spices and perfume. And you can just imagine 20, 30 years previously, this woman's father, or maybe her grandfather, very carefully handing over this fragile jar and saying to the then young woman, be careful with this. Tuck this away somewhere. Put it under your bed, bury it under the floorboards, because this is nard. This is worth a year's money. So keep this for a rainy day. You never know what will happen. Your husband might die, you might fall on hard times, and this is for you to get you through that time. This is it. So try and picture the scene. You're a man with men. A woman on her own walks into the room carrying perfume. Then notice what Mark says. She breaks the alabaster jar and then pours all of the contents onto Jesus. This morning, you and I, we read this. But you're a man in that room 2,000 years ago. You're not reading this. You are seeing this. And you are smelling this. It's a man's room. They're talking. When the woman walks in, 90% of them would stop talking. She breaks a jar, pours the contents over the guest of honour's head. 100% of them are in silence. And then that smell, that perfume smell, that womanly smell, that smell that belongs on dates and stuff like that, fills the religious atmosphere of this dinner. You are speechless. Some of those present were saying indignantly to one another, what a waste of perfume. It could have been sold for more than a year's wages and the money given to the poor. And then the narrator tells us that they rebuked her harshly. All the men in the room begin to speak negatively to the woman. So here in this room you have two very different emotions. On the one hand you have this woman. Now women in the Gospels are interesting. They feel things about Jesus that most of the men don't seem to feel. For example, when Jesus is dying on the cross, and all of his friends have gone, most of them anyway, like, forget this, I'm out of here, they've turned their back on him, there's this small, persistent group of women who refuse to leave his side. They're not going. They don't care what it means. They don't care what it costs them. They will not leave Jesus' side. And the women in the Gospels who seem to have been the closest to Jesus are women who have, how can I put it delicately? Well, they were sketchy women. They were women whom Jesus had helped move on from embarrassing episodes in their past. And because Jesus helped them get through the things they needed to get through, they felt so loyal to him, so close to him. So I think that's what's going on in this story. She walks into the room filled with emotions of gratitude. She's thinking, this is Jesus. Jesus helped me get through that thing. He helped me move on from that episode in my life. And when everyone else in the village looks at me this way, but Jesus looks at me different. And I'm so grateful. I am so grateful. And this is all I have. This is all I have in the world. And I'm just giving it to Jesus. And I don't care if it's a waste. I don't care if it's stupid. I'm all in. I am all in right now. And then you have, religious guys in the room who don't get it. I don't know why they don't get it. But they just don't get it. Then Jesus says, leave her alone. Why are you bothering her? She's done a beautiful thing to me. You'll always have the poor with you, and you can help them anytime you want. But you will not always have me. Next sentence, last sentence. The sentence you came here to hear today. She did what she could. She did what she could. Sound familiar? She did what she could. How much of a better tomorrow do you rob yourself of by saying, if I could do this, if I could do this, then I would. If I could do this, if I could do this. Faith, like life, only deals in reality. No one cares what you would do if only you could and if only you had. The only thing that matters in this life is that you do what you could. A phrase that annoys me no end, for example, is, what's that thing we say all the time? If I won the lottery, and then we talk about the things we do if we won the lottery. What would you do if you won the lottery? What is it now, 60 million or something? What would you do if you won the lottery? Buy some better clothes, that'll be a start, I suppose. Nicer car, bigger home, go on nicer vacations. Fun question. Here's a better question though. What will you do today? What will you do with this ordinary day? What will you do today as you clean your house, as you please your boss, as you run your children to school, as you pay your bills, as you cope with all the things that you have to cope with in your family? What will you do as you live with the anxiety that's tearing you apart? What will you do today? That's the only question that matters. What will you do? Because today, you're alive. And it's awesome being alive. If you don't think so, go to the cemetery and ask them. One of the best ways to stop being your own worst enemy is to just simply change the vocabulary in your own head. Stop saying if only, if only, if only, if only. No one cares about if only. The people who get to win in this life are the people who switch the conversation in their head from if only to maybe I can, to maybe I should, to maybe I will, to I think I will. I think I will. And they try, and they try, and they try, and they keep trying, And eventually, they win. So in the midst of the Bible's darkest story, there is this other story. And I like the way Mark sandwiches the brightness of what this woman did in the middle of this dark, dark episode. Because we too oftentimes find ourselves in dark and disappointing circumstances. And yet in the midst of that, the call is for us to trust Jesus and to waste our lives doing what we can. That's all that matters. We do what we can. Thank you for coming. God bless you. See you next week.